Hi, everyone. My name is Jesse Robbins, and welcome to LPLE from Dialogue FM. We're the podcast that lets you practice listening in English. We speak English slowly and clearly so that you can follow along and understand native English speakers more easily. I'm excited to help you improve your English listening skill, as well as help you learn new vocabulary, grammar, and idioms commonly heard in conversations among native English speakers. If you want to practice listening in English, then we invite you to join our conversation. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Jesse.
It came up in a conversation I had with a couple of friends who are learning English or who are not native English speakers. They use the word should to make a recommendation.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, exactly. Now, us as native speakers, we know what that means. We know the feeling we have when we hear the word should said to us. However, when I started to pay more attention to my non-native English-speaking friends, I noticed that they use the word should a lot. Now, I'm trying to think about why. Why is it that they use the word should? And I've come to one conclusion. Maybe in their language, in their native language of Japanese or Vietnamese, it's common and culturally and socially acceptable to use the word should in their conversation, in their language. So in their mind, they're just translating the word into English, and then they think it's culturally okay.
I think that's possible. The other thing that I think is also possible is the fault of English textbooks that we teach. We definitely teach should in examples like, I have a headache. You should see the doctor. I need help. You should ask for it. We do try to set up situations where students learn the meaning of should. And of course, it's grammatically correct, but in fact, it's not. It's often not what we really say. We might say something like, I think you should see a doctor, which is much less aggressive than saying you should.
We also say, how about you or see a doctor? Or what if you saw a doctor?
Yes.
Or have you seen a doctor yet?
Have you seen a doctor yet is one of the most common ways. Right. Yes.
There are many different ways we can make a recommendation more politely than saying should. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about that. The first question I want to ask you is, what do you feel when someone, even maybe a friend, says should to you? You should do this. You should go there. You should buy this.
Well, my first reaction might be, of course, it always depends on the situation and on the relationship, etc. But my first reaction might be, who are you to tell me what to do? And the problem with should in that case is that the person who uses it is setting him or herself up as an authority figure. Even if we know that's not true, we don't like hearing it.
I agree. The way you describe that is exactly how I feel as well. Like you said, it depends on the situation, the relationship, the context. However, when I hear the same person, even a friend, say, "You should," too many times, I start to feel irritated and annoyed, as if they are trying to be an authority over me.
Yes.
That's good.
Now, if somebody is an authority, I think, for example, if you went to a financial advisor and the advisor said, you should be careful of investing in stocks this year, that's different. He is in that position. I have asked him for his advice. I think part of the problem is we in general, as a culture, do not like advice that we have not asked for.
That's a great way to put it. Should is what we call sometimes unsolicited advice.
Yes. And we don't like it.
Right. Unsolicited means we did not ask for it. Right? So we did not solicit is a verb. Solicit means to ask for something.
Yes.
Right? And unsolicited is an adjective, right? So unsolicited means advice that we did not ask for. So to your point, financial advisor, doctor, maybe even teacher. Right? So where when the relationship is such that there is clearly an expert or just someone who has more authority or someone that we are asking advice from, then the word should, like you described, is perfect. Makes total sense. In common relationship and friendship, even friends, I don't really hear myself and my friends using the word should with each other.
I don't either, except it can happen in a situation like this where it's not exactly advice. I had a conversation last night with some friends, and one of them was telling me that they love a particular actress. And I said, "Oh, you should see the new movie with her in it." And we would use it there, and it's more like an encouragement. It doesn't have quite the same meaning. And I think we use it quite frequently in a situation like that. "Oh, I know a book you would love. You should read blah, blah, blah," and give the title. And it's really not the same thing. It's like, yes, encouragement or high recommendation. That's about the only time I ever use it with a friend.
In that situation, you are typically excited about something, right?
And want to share it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So it probably has less to do with the other person and more to do with how much you like something. So, for example, the movie or the restaurant or the book. When you say, "Oh, you should read this book," or "You should read this," or "You should watch this movie," I bet it has probably less to do with the other person and more you supporting that book or that movie.
I would agree with that, yes. And it's also the belief that the other person would really enjoy it. You totally want to share it with them.
Right. Now, we talked about the sometimes negative meaning behind the word should. And yet, it's still taught in many English language classes. So I want to talk about other ways that we could make recommendations so that the listeners can start to practice those words as well.
Great. Let's see. Well, you mentioned several in the example of the doctor. Instead of saying, you should see a doctor, we say, have you seen a doctor yet? It's somewhat softer if you say, I think maybe you should see a doctor. But you need to have that little prelude, those few words of introduction to say, I am no expert, but in my opinion, you should see a doctor. Sometimes we would say, I'd see a doctor if I were you. Or if I were in your shoes, I think I would see a doctor. Those are some examples that come to my mind.
You know, as you say these, I remember the conversation we had last week. And we talked about how Americans are seen as sometimes too direct. However, this is yet another example of how we're actually not that direct.
I agree.
Right? In this case, especially among friends, maybe somebody might think, well, wait, if they're your friend, you should be able to speak directly, right? That makes logical sense. However, in this case, I think that between friends, we try to maintain a positive, equal, and harmonious relationship. So that's why we try to be careful about how we say things. Now, I also realize that this also depends on the region of America we live in. So we live on the West Coast, right?
Yes.
And wouldn't you say that West Coast people are typically seen as more polite than the East Coast?
Well, I think, and of course this is just a stereotype, I think that there's a tendency to be more abrupt, more blunt on the East Coast. That's how West Coast people perceive, at least people in the Northeast. Probably not the Southeast, but definitely in the Northeast. We perceive them as being more blunt and abrupt and direct. In my experience, that's not necessarily true. But I do think on the West Coast, we are maybe a little less easily sociable. We like our own space. We tend to, probably a lot of our ancestors came here because they wanted their own independence. They wanted space from other people. I think that's a little stronger on the on the West Coast. What do you think?
I remember the phrase passive aggressive.
Oh, yes.
And I feel like we on the West Coast, especially in the Northwest where we live, we are seen as being very passive aggressive. Now, passive aggressive is hard to explain. It's better done with examples, and we could do examples later. But for the time being, let's just say that West Coast people, especially people from New York and Massachusetts, Boston.
East Coast people.
I'm sorry, East Coast, thank you.
Yes.
The East Coast people, your Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts, they are seen as more aggressive, more blunt, more direct. And then here on the West Coast, we're seen as maybe more polite, softer, and sometimes even more passive-aggressive. So as you and I talk about other ways to say the word should, that's a perfect example of how our region speaks slightly different than the East Coast.
I think that's probably true. I'm sure there are books written about it that are scientifically researched, but in terms of the way we perceive each other in this country and the stereotypes we have, I agree with you on that.
In many different situations, there's different ways to use the word should. So, for example, if my throat is scratchy, you might say to me, "Oh, how about you have a drink of water?" Or, "Please, take a drink of water." Very, very kind.
Yes, that's right. Have a drink of water. Or, can I get you something? Can I get you something? Or we might ask for more information, like, do you have a cold? Do you think you have a cold? Did you swallow something? We first are going to show our interest and our support before we're going to give any advice in general, I think.
So for our listening audience, as you learn the English language and you listen to conversation, try to pay attention to how people make recommendations to other people. And also be aware that sometimes using the word should could come across and be understood as more negative than you intended, right? This is a great opportunity for you to really start paying more attention to native English speakers and learning from their conversations. Thank you for listening to this episode of LPLE. Let's practice listening in English from Dialogue FM. Subscribe to LPLE on iTunes to hear the latest episodes, or listen to past episodes on our website, dialogue.fm. That's dialog.fm. If you have questions or comments about English, or if you would like for us to use a word, grammar, or idiom in our conversation so you can learn how to use it correctly, we would love to hear from you on Twitter at dialogue.fm or Facebook at facebook.com/dialoguefm.